Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Tabman, and welcome to Crimes and Times. As parents, we know there are several scenarios that would qualify as one of our worst nightmares. And tonight, we're going to be joined by a man who's been living that nightmare for more than 10 years. When a young child goes missing, we call the police immediately, as we should. And if it's a young child, the police have a pretty clear protocol as what to do. And if it's a very young age and certain criteria are met, the assets of the FBI may be made available through the Child Abduction Response Team. But there's a gray area. When you have a young adult, maybe 18 or 19 years old, who's gone missing, in the eyes of the law, that's an adult. And they can go missing. No law has been broken, and they don't necessarily see any danger absent something specific. But as parents, we know that an 18, 19-year-old in our eyes are no adults. They are children. And sometimes we just need that help. So tonight we're going to talk to Don Ross, whose son Jesse went missing over 10 years ago in very suspicious circumstances. And we'll also hear from Peter Duffy, the private detective who Don brought in to help him with this case. First, we'll start with Don. Don, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Could you tell the audience a little bit where you are, where Jesse was living at the time, what he was doing up in Chicago, and sort of how this all unfolded?
Okay, well, I'm in Belton, Missouri. We're on the south side of Kansas City. We've lived here about 12 years, I guess, 13 years. And it was at the time we were living here in 2006, Jesse had signed up through UMKC, his school, for a Model UN conference in Chicago. So on the 18th, I had to get up about 5 in the morning, and basically Jesse woke me up, and I had some breakfast, and we just got together, got in the SUV, and I drove him to his school where he would be leaving for Chicago in a van with a number of other students. So we drove into town and got to the school area. To this day, I still cannot remember what area within the campus, but it was just a little small, dark parking lot. We pulled into the parking lot. I noticed there was another vehicle, and there was a man and a young man there together. And I stopped by them, and Jesse got out and got his things together. And then I pulled on into the end of the parking lot. It was basically a dead end. It had the one entrance. So I just turned around and I came back up. I saw the other man get in his car and he left. So I just eased up beside Jesse and kind of looked out the window at him, and he was involved in deep conversation with this other young man, and they were talking, and he did look over and we made eye contact. I waved, but I didn't want to be, the intruding parent. He's a college student, so I just eased on out of the parking lot and came home.
So Jesse was to be there. This time?
I'm sorry?
How old was Jesse, the audience?
He was 19 years old.
19 years old, okay.
Yes. And so I went on home, and then 4 days later, on the 21st, Jesse was to call us and let us know that when they were leaving and when he would be coming home. And sometime in the afternoon, I think we'd established maybe around 3 p.m. I was sleeping. I worked nights, so I was in my sleep cycle. My wife was at work on a day job. The phone rang, and I was kind of groggy, but I picked it up, and it was not Jesse. It was one of the sponsors from the trip he was on from his school. And they informed me that they were not sure at that time just where Jesse was. And they were looking for him, and then I guess that they would let me know more when they found out. So
Don, let me interrupt you there for a second, Don. So let's tell the audience, what kind of kid was Jesse? Because I never had the honor of meeting him, but from everything I read, very studious. He was enjoying what he was doing. Is that correct?
Yes, he was very serious about the things he took seriously. He had this little crazy side about things he didn't, and he was very good at jokes, practical jokes, and things like that, and always a big grin on his face. And one of those guys that kind of got by with things because I think the people around him, well, it's Jesse, and they expected that. But he did, when things needed to be done, Jesse got them done. Uh, this model UN thing was very special to him. It was his second year, and he was very excited about it.
As a matter of fact, it didn't even call you. He spoke to you or your wife about how much fun he was having.
Yes, he did. Uh, he called me later that same day when he left, and I was in the middle of traffic. It was really busy, and he called on the cell, so I talked with him a little bit, and we talked about he was in Joliet, and the movie The Blues Brothers featured that area, and he was just really animated, really excited about the whole thing, and I just hated to do it, but I had to go ahead and tell him, I'm in traffic trying to drive, and I need to hang up now, and so we hung up, and I just thought, well, that's okay. I'll see him in 4 days. So.
Now, just let me throw for the audience, because we're already getting questions coming in. If you have any questions for any of our guests, you could email us at crimesandtimes@gmail.com or Twitter at crimesandtimes. So, Don, I think about, I have 3 boys, and if one of them wasn't where he's supposed to be at the time, I think, oh, that's him. But with the other 2, I might feel differently. When Jesse wasn't where he was supposed to be, knowing the kind of kid he was, what struck you?
Shock.
It was just not in his character, right?
No. I mean, it's one of those things to where it just hits you so hard. He's way up there in Chicago, and we're way down here, and we don't know anything, and they can't tell us anything at all. So at that time, yes, I think we really started to, I don't know, maybe my imagination went to work, but it scared me. It really scared me. And I just, basically at that time, I got up, wandered around the house a little bit. I didn't want to call Donna and have to tell her. I hope maybe they'd call back. I wandered outside. Jesse's car was sitting out there, so I got the key and I cleaned it out and cleaned it up real nice for when he got back. You're telling yourself he's going to come back. And even I know later a neighbor said she saw me in the driveway and she knew something wasn't right. And so it was just,
Don, let me ask you, when they made the decision to leave the hotel without Jesse at that point hadn't shown up, had the police been contacted yet by, the school, the chaperone?
According to what we have seen from the police reports, Jesse disappeared, or they lost track of him after that meeting, which was like at 2:30 a.m., somewhere in there. His roommate thought Jesse was laying in the dark in his room around 6 in the morning, but when he got up, he realized he was wrong. And then he talked with the sponsors somewhere in the morning. I think they kind of made the assumption, yes, Jesse will be here when we'll pack his things and everything. And when it's time to go, Jesse knows to be here, so he will be here. And then at that point, he wasn't. They then made the decision that they needed to get the rest of the students home. And so one of the sponsors brought the students home. They brought Jesse's things. And then the other one did go to the police around that time, but the police report we saw states it was turned in around 4:30 p.m.
So all the children or the other kids, young adults, had already left. All the ones that were with Jesse on this trip had already left. All the potential witnesses. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, I mean, it'd be common to think, or most of us probably think, precious time and precious information was lost by the police not being there early enough. You all agree on that?
It's something that you look at and you try to understand that we're all not necessarily trained or prepared for things like this. we kind of wish that the school had taken things more seriously initially. As soon as they did not know where a student was, we we would have liked it if they would have taken the initiative right then, and possibly it would have changed something.
Right.
Again, uh, our experience with the police, the if they had reported him at a very early hour in the morning, police might have said, "Well, he's only been missing, 4 hours or 8 hours or something," and they might not even have taken a report at that time. Some of that varies from
Oh,
police
I
force.
agree. You talk about a young man, 19 years old, away from home. I know I was a police officer one time. The thoughts were I was out there doing something that all young men would be doing. But certainly, in retrospect, and it's always easier, in hindsight, the thought of the school leaving with all those kids, knowing Jesse wasn't there. It's one thing to be late, one thing to not be where you are, but when you're not there to go home, and you're talking about a kid who's there without his car, 19 years old from Belton, Missouri, one has to wonder, was that, a smart thing to do? And I hope we've learned a lesson at least about that. So Don, hang in there. I want to bring Peter in on this. Peter, you're
Okay.
a very experienced, well-known private eye in the Kansas City area. Don very wisely brought you in. And by the way, Don, thank you for having introduced me to Peter. He's become a good friend of mine, so I appreciate that. So Peter, what did you do? What was at the outset, and what did you think your strategy was? And kind of tell us what you learned about the case and what you learned maybe about what not to do or what to do in the future for all of us.
Um, oh, I met with the Ross family, and it had already been quite some time that Jesse had been missing when we first met. And, by the time I got involved in the case, made contact with the police department, started going over some of the evidence, and started, trying to make some headway on my own. The single biggest thing that left out for me was the multi-jurisdictional issues. There were 1,000 kids at that conference from all over the country. So, the single largest problem is trying to track all those kids down so that you can have a conversation with them. It's just not possible.
So we agree then, one of the first lessons we learned is you have witnesses, contain them, potential witnesses.
Absolutely. But even so, I'm not sure that it's something that would have been possible in this case. It would have been nice had they been able to contain the people that were in the meeting that Jesse was last seen in and the people that were traveling with him. At least those two things would have been a nice first step. But that didn't happen. So that was the first roadblock. The second roadblock, obviously, was the fact that the scene, as it were, and everything else wasn't here. It was in Chicago. So, that necessitated a trip to Chicago, had to figure out the lay of the land, so to speak. And then we had to, because the potential witness base was so scattered all over the place, we had to try to find as much information as we could on those potential witnesses so that we could try to track them down. And we had to, work out coordination with somebody locally in Chicago that we could work with on the ground so that they could do some things that we couldn't do from here. There were a lot of things to try to overcome.
But did any of the witness interviews yield any important information, any leads that came out of those interviews?
Not really. There was some information that was useful, some information that was that gave us some insight into some potential things. But there were so many people that we either couldn't track down, they wouldn't respond, they wouldn't talk to us once we did find them, that the information we were able to glean from the interviews we were able to conduct wasn't as useful as it probably could have been.
Do you think the people who didn't want to speak to you were guilty of something or had some knowledge, or just, kids being kids at that age just didn't find it all that important?
I think the majority of it was, in my experience, a lot of times if you're not directly involved with something, and especially if you're young, you don't want to get involved. And I think a lot of them just didn't want to get involved, which is
And I want to come back
really
to
too
Peter.
bad.
Hold on. I want to just answer one of the questions. Don, I'm going to answer the question. Don, tell me if I'm right here. There's a question as to why didn't the roommate notice that Jesse was not in his bed. I believe he came in, it was dark, it was late. Jesse had like some stuff lying on his bed, and the other roommate wasn't really paying attention and at least thought that Jesse was in his bed. Do I have that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
FYI, now I'm not getting Peter's audio. Is that?
You should be. Yeah, you should be. I'm sorry about that. We're going to work on that.
That's
Peter,
okay.
you hear Don, don't you?
Yeah, I hear him just fine.
Yeah. Okay, Don. We'll see if we can't straighten that out.
Okay.
All right. So Peter,
Yeah.
we said I'm sorry, Don.
No, that's okay. You were
Okay.
correct that he stated that Jesse would just pile his clothes in a big pile on the bed, and apparently that's what he saw.
Right. And that's and look, the young kid came in and he's not thinking anything. We certainly can't fault him, for not going there and checking. There's kids out and having a good time. So Peter, what was based on your investigation, the last time Jesse was seen?
The last time that I have anyone that spoke to me that saw Jesse was right before the break in the Model UN meeting. He got up and left the room right before the break started. And on his way out of the room was the last time he was seen.
Did anyone find that unusual that he would leave? Is he the kind of kid who would, hang out to the last second, then stick around the room and just talk? Did anyone find it unusual, the fact that he left so quickly?
Not really. Nobody that I spoke to did.
Nothing unusual. And the hotel has a picture of that, don't we? Of him leaving?
No, the picture that we have, I believe, is from before he went to the meeting.
Before he went to the meeting. And Max, we can just get that photo up there. Let's let the audience see it. Okay, I think they're seeing it now. That's a picture of Jesse leaving. It's the last known sighting, at least that we caught on camera, of Jesse. Now, the hotel, Peter, is on the water, correct?
It is.
And another question has come in. Did the police do a search of the water? I believe they did.
They did.
They did.
Yeah, several.
And several. Okay. Now, Don, let's go back to you, because when Jesse didn't show up, what did the police do with his computer, and did he have a cell phone at the time?
Okay, Jesse had 2 cell phones. He had originally a cell phone that was economical, but it was for this area only. So when he went to Chicago, he had a cell phone that he could use nationwide. So he had both those cell phones with him. He didn't have a computer with him. The cell phone that he could use here locally came back with his things, but he had the other cell phone and his wallet, personal things like that. They were on him and they were never found, so we don't know what happened to them. He did have
able to track. Was the police able to track the phone? Last known location. I don't know what the technology was. 10 years ago.
The police, they asked us if we would contact AT&T and if we would have them give us records of his phone calls. The police did say something to me about the last signal they got from Jesse they thought was right outside the building. We've got many, many reports, and some from police were different than others from police, so it got a little conflicting sometimes. But supposedly they said that from the time he left the meeting, that maybe 10 minutes later, that's when his cell phone last pinged, and then it went dead at that point.
Interesting. Now, actually, we have a question here that, Peter, I think you're very familiar with. There's a question, if there's no video evidence of Jesse leaving the hotel, could you kind of fill us in on what that evidence told us or didn't tell us?
There were actually ways to get in and out of the hotel without being seen on camera. There are some service corridors in the hotel that's used by staff, particularly on those meeting room floors and everything, so that the staff can stay out of the way of guests. And Jesse, along with some of the other people that went to the conference, liked to use those service corridors to get around the hotel. I understand that the night of the conference in the hotel, the doors that are external, that those service corridors lead to, they have alarms on them with the security in the hotel. Um, but they recorded so many alarms on those doors that they stopped paying attention to them. So it would have been easily possible for him to leave the hotel without being seen on camera.
And of course, we're talking 2006. So even out in the streets, we're not talking about the kind of video camera coverage that we would have today in a big city.
Well, they had just put up traffic cameras actually, but they didn't turn them on until January of 2007. So they were no good to us.
Okay, so we don't know for sure. Now, Don talked about the ping, but other than that, we don't know if Jesse ever did leave the hotel, do we?
We don't know for certain. The police indicated that they had from the cell phone that the last ping was about, I believe it was about 6 minutes after he left the building, or was known to leave the building, or last seen in the building, that the cell phone stopped communicating with the tower. Could have been that it was turned off, the battery was taken out. Could have been that it was, just the phone could have been thrown in the river. The phone could have been destroyed. We have no way of knowing other than it just stopped communicating.
Very frustrating. Don, when this first started breaking in the onset of this, did you get the feeling, and I'm not trying to put an idea in your head, but did you get the feeling that the police weren't really considering Jesse in danger? Did they feel that most likely he had left out of his own accord, or did they sense the urgency, in your opinion?
Initially, we didn't have a lot of contact with the police. We talked with the individual from the school that brought Jesse's stuff home. Eventually, he got a phone number, and I think we called. The police didn't really have anything, so they didn't talk to us a lot. They just, he introduced himself, who he was, and that he was on the case, and they would keep us informed. Later on, I received another call from an undercover officer who apparently was out on the street, and he was asking for details of Jesse's appearance and so on. And then as the days passed, we initially wanted to go to Chicago. We wanted to sit down with the police and find out what they knew and what they were doing. But there was a really bad storm front on the East Coast, I guess record breaking, and all flights were grounded, so we could not go. So we had to wait, and we did not actually get there until around December 10th. And at that time, we did get to meet the individual who was in charge of Jesse's case. And he was very understanding, and he seemed to kind of identify with us as parents of a missing person. And of course, you go up there and you hope to see everybody's running around and doing these things and flying around here and there and phone calls because your son's missing. But
right.
It's a case, and they proceed. They have procedures, and so they showed us. They started a case book, and they told us some of the things they were doing, and they did help us to. They set up a press conference. They actually gave us transportation around the city to our hotel and so on. All these were good things, and we are happy that the police did this for us. Of course, as parents of a missing child, you appreciate it, but you didn't want to stay at a hotel, and you really didn't want to be pampered and all. You just want your son back.
That's right. Don, I have to ask you, how, from the
Yes.
time that Jesse was missing, that the chaperone knew Jesse was missing, how much time passed until you were first in contact with the police?
It gets to be a real blur. I'm not sure if it was that same day. I think possibly later on that day, the sponsor who was bringing Jesse's things home, he came to the house with Jesse's things. He had maps of the city. He talked about details and where Jesse had been when he went missing and where the river was and a number of things. And he told us, I believe he told us then that once they had a contact number for the police, they would get that to us. So it might have been that evening. It might have been the next day. It's too slow for us.
Well, I agree. I want to get that. Peter, I wanted your opinion. I just as a former police officer, I'm thinking I would have contacted that family right away, even though, he's legally an adult. But one, just as a courtesy, but two, don't you think a parent of, someone who lives at home may have some pretty important information? What's your opinion about that, Peter?
I agree. I would have wanted to be in contact with the family so that I could find out more about the personality of the subject. If this was the kind of behavior that he would normally engage in, if this was out of the norm, that sort of thing. And then, like you said, it's common courtesy.
I think so. Now, let me, one question that came in, and Don, I think we kind of addressed this. Someone's asking, why did it take so long to notify the police? And I think we said that was the decision of the chaperone to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, the sponsors in charge. There was a sponsor, and then there was an individual who was a senior student. He was much older than the rest, and they assigned him to help the sponsor out. And they were the ones, or at least the sponsor was the one who informed us, and then who went to the police. So I think he was the one that apparently decided that they would wait. They were fairly certain Jesse would turn up at the time that they had to leave. So they did wait until that time before they
discretionary
actually.
Discretionary call, which years later is, easy to say was a wrong call, I may have heard. But, at the moment, I don't think anyone acted, with malice or with disregard. They just made the best judgment call they could at the time. Would you agree with that, Don?
Yes, I think so. None of us are trained for this sort of thing. In hindsight, maybe these people need to be trained for this type of possibility.
Yes, and a lot of training has gone on in law enforcement. Since in the last 10 years. I know the response and the FBI's involvement and understanding, the risk and doing more of a profile, of the child and the situation rather than just dismissing it. Another question came in. We kind of addressed it. How could they let anyone leave when someone was missing? Again, I think Peter, Don, tell me if you think I didn't get this right, but basically it was a judgment call. There were parents waiting for their children to come home. At that time, no one believed Jesse was in danger. But I think in retrospect, looking at it now, I certainly would have been okay if I was a parent saying, hey, your kid may be late. We have to wait for the police to show up. We have someone missing, and we just have to play out all the odds. And any discussion on that, Peter?
Yes. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Don.
We felt like, again, this is from the parents' perspective, we felt like that the school was concentrated. There were over 1,000 students from all over the country. And so the schools basically went in the mode of one student missing. Well, we got 1,000 to take care of, so we need to do that first. And there were 13 altogether from Jesse's school, so there were 12 of those. So I think they just weren't sure what to do, so they decided to go into regular mode. These guys need to go home, hotel rooms cleaned out, and basically then we'll address Jesse's issue later.
Peter, you were going to say something?
I think that the issue, really came down to the fact that there were so many people there from so many different places. Even if you just held back the kids that were in the Model UN, or not the Model UN, but the Security Council, that alone represented several schools. So all of the kids that were there with those kids would have had to halt their travel plans. Some of them may have been flights. Some of them may have been driving. Then you're talking about extra hotel. They were all leaving right around the time of checkout, shortly after. So they would have needed hotel rooms for at least another day. The amount of coordination that it would have taken for everybody to stay on scene, because the notification wasn't made until right at the end, would have been pretty substantial. And so, while in retrospect it wasn't the best decision, I can see why it was made.
Right, right. No one was negligent. No one had bad intent. But now looking back, maybe as a lesson to all of us, to take these things a little more seriously. Another question there, Don. Someone just wants to know about how long was it from Jesse's disappearance that we knew about it till there was an active investigation looking for Jesse? Was it hours, days? Do you even recall?
To the best of my knowledge, Jesse was last seen at 2:30 a.m. early on the 21st, and the police report was turned in that same day at 4:30 p.m. I think it said on the form, and at that point, that's when the investigation began. What really the details we don't know because they didn't share a lot with us. In fact, we got it some days later. I think we got a call. They said, "Do not contact the press. We want a chance to investigate this on our own." And we didn't know. So we just thought, well, we need to work with law enforcement. They're the ones that we're depending on to find Jesse. So we agreed. And so basically we just sat and waited. So
working with law enforcement and following the lead, 9 times out of 10 is going to be the right thing to do. You do need them and you want to cooperate. Peter, without mentioning names, did you develop any suspects in this case?
No.
No. Any clues or any ideas as to what could have happened, or is it still just a mystery?
It's really a mystery. I don't believe personally that anybody that was at the conference did anything. I don't think that it was any kind of situation like that. I personally, a lot of people think that there's the possibility that Jesse. There seems to be two main avenues of thought, which is one that he fell in the river, and the other one is that that he left on his own. Given what I know about Jesse, based on my investigation, I don't believe that he just left on his own. He had a good life. He had a lot of things that he wanted. He had a lot of things going for him. He was heading in the direction that he wanted to be heading in. He had a good internship at a radio station, had a job where he didn't have to work hard, got paid well, doing voiceover work. So that doesn't seem likely at all. Falling in the river, anything's possible. I'm not 100% sure.
Was he the kind of kid, and I throw this out to either one of you, was he the kind of kid who would just even walk out there and put himself in a precarious situation at 2:30 in the morning in a city that's strange to him? Is that something he would do?
We were told by several people that the students there were coming and going at all hours. The area that they were in was very well lit and was downtown, and people didn't seem to be concerned about it. Jesse was actually staying at the Four Points Hotel on Michigan Avenue, and then they didn't have room for everybody in one hotel, so the meeting he was attending was on Water Street, and that was a Sheridan office and towers. So like I say, they apparently through the night and various times, students were walking back and forth all the time. We did notice apparently that the elevators and the corridors and many of the rooms within the hotel, the large open areas had cameras. If Jesse had come back into the hotel, gone to a room or anything, he surely would have been on a camera. So
right.
It led to the speculation that he went out this particular door the students used near the front of the hotel. There were no lights there, no cameras at all. So he would have stepped out into the darkness. And
let me get to a couple questions here. Don, Don, there was a body found in Wisconsin, I remember not too long ago. There was some hope it might be Jesse. Do you know it? Obviously it's not, but was that body ever identified? Do you know?
There were a couple of bodies found, but the one I think you're addressing, a family was there on holiday and they were walking along the river, the bank of the lake, and they came upon a body. Uh, we were able to get contact with this family, and they told us that according to everything that they had seen about Jesse, the clothing didn't appear to match, which is not a guarantee. We did also have contact with the sheriff's office in that area, and they were sending the remains off for DNA. And we, of course, asked if they could let us know the results, and they said that they would, but we haven't heard anything. So, we don't know.
All right. I ask you another couple more questions here, then I'll bring up one last point. Wasn't the emergency meeting wasn't there an emergency meeting with a minimal number of students? I think the answer to that was no. I think we've answered that correctly. Don?
Well, there were 30 students, we were told, all together in that meeting. So there would be Jesse and then 29 others. His friend Ralph Parker was he was the roommate, and he was there with Jesse at the time. Jesse had actually said something to Ralph before he left, but Ralph said, you just don't think about it, and he didn't catch it, but he just nodded and instead of asking again. So he was always wondered if maybe Jesse had said something about where he was going.
And Caesar in hindsight. Now, Don, I know you also you try to raise a certain amount of money, such as through your book, Where's Opie, for the purpose of being able to fund things to bring awareness. Someone's asking here, is there any way people can help? Is there any crowdfunding set up? Is there some website or something you'd like to direct everybody to?
We had currently, what we are doing, we have an annual event, November 21st, the date he disappeared. Each year, we call it Opie Fest. Jesse was a radio personality here locally, and his character's name was Opie. And so each year we've had this celebration of his life and awareness of other missing persons, and there's food and music and things. And then we ask for a donation when people come. And at one time, yes, I was selling books, and so on. The books are still available on the various online sites out there, but we're not really, at this point, we're not actively asking people out there to donate. We currently, we do some travel, and anytime there's something we can do to highlight Jesse's case, we do that, but we're not traveling and doing as many things as we were, so we feel like we don't, at this point, we don't just want to ask for funds just to ask for them.
Understood. And where can people find out about Opie Fest? Is it on Facebook?
We do this through so far we've done this through our church, and we do on Facebook. I usually put it out there as an event, and it will say Opie Fest, and then it will explain what is going on. This year, we're hopeful that a friend of a friend's is a videographer, I guess that's a term. He's put together a documentary of Jesse's story, and we're thinking of finding somewhere that we might do a preview of this pre-showing, private showing of this documentary before it's released to networks or whatever.
I already got some interest. Someone said, do you know the name of the documentary? Release that?
I think it's the last time I saw Jesse. Or Opie.
Okay. Let me one last question here. Then
it's still in the works. He's a very thorough individual, and he's really been working on it quite a bit. So at some point, when he finalizes everything, then he'll get with us and let us know what the final product's going to look like.
So keep posting on Facebook. One last question I think I can answer. Someone wants to know why there was not a buddy system I think we're talking about, college-age kids, and it's a good idea, but that just wouldn't work. Peter, let me
Well,
get your
in the,
thought here. I'm sorry, good? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was in the Army, and when we would go into town, and when we would, of course, at night, go in town and just go out and eat and drink a little bit maybe, but the thing is, we would go in groups, and nobody got left behind. That may be a little different situation, but if you went and you had a little bit too much to drink, you couldn't just say, well, I think I'm going to hang around. No, they got you, and everybody went home because they knew that military towns sometimes were a little risky. But
Don, I
in
got to
this
interrupt
case,
you. It was just funny because just a little while ago, my engineer here, who just recently served in the military, wrote me a note saying exactly what you just said. He said, in the Army, we'd never leave without anybody, being there. And he just wrote here while you're talking that's still how it works. And he left
yeah,
recently.
I think that's a good idea. And I know young people, they think they're invincible. They just, and you want them to pursue their dreams. You want them to go out in the world and not have fear. But sometimes you do need to do that. If you're going somewhere, tell someone you're going. Better yet, take someone with you if you can, especially, again, if Jesse left the hotel, if he had something in mind he wanted to do at that late hour, we think he should have told someone explicitly where he was going, and either that or taken someone. But
yeah, Don was 19 years old, like every 19-year-old out there. Right?
Exactly.
Every of us who raised teenage boys, we know what it's about. Hey, so Peter, Department of Homeland Security has this app, Lost Person Behavior app. You could download it on the phone here, and if you, in the middle of a lost person, you could enter some data here, and I'll give you some ideas of what to do and what to look. What do you think about something like that?
I think that just like all apps like that, I mean, they could be useful in certain situations. Sometimes they're not going to work as you'd like them to, but I think anything that could potentially help one person is a good idea.
And what do you think about this? I went on here to look at the app from the Department of Homeland Security, and it costs $10 to download. What do you think about that?
I think I don't really like that much.
Yeah, kind of unbelievable, huh? Yeah. All right,
Yeah,
last thing,
I think
Don. I'm sorry. What was that, Peter?
No, nothing.
All right. Don, last thing, if there are, hey, can we put up a picture of, Opie, please, Max? Let's get a picture of Jesse up there for the audience. And Don, if anyone does have tips, and certainly anyone in Chicago or anyone who might have been there 10 years ago, if you're listening or someone's listening, somebody knows something, as with every time one of these cases. Somebody knows something. Give the Rosses that closure that they so desperately deserve. Don, where could someone call? Who should someone call if they have a tip?
They should call the Chicago Police Department. Detective Michael Roth, R-O-T-H, is in charge of the case. So he would be the man to contact.
Okay, and we're showing, and you guys can't see it, but we're showing Jesse's picture right now. Don, everybody, our heart goes out to you. We know what it must be like to live with it, and we just hope, you get the closure you deserve sometime soon. Peter, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for your help, and thanks for being a good friend over these years. I appreciate it. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Today, we heard the story, mysterious disappearance. For us, you could be an armchair detective, but for the Ross family, it's living every day not knowing what happened to their son. We live and learn. Of course, we could look back and think of all the things that were done wrong, but nobody acted with malice. No one acted negligently. Just they didn't know what to do. Let's learn from that. If you have someone missing, call the police. If it's a child, know what your child is wearing that day. Make a mental note, or better yet, if you can, take a picture of them that day. We all have the phones, but always have a picture, current picture with you on your phone or whatever to give law enforcement if your child is missing. Also, look around for any clues. Look for dangerous areas near water, someplace there might be, somewhere they might have been lured to. It's hard to think of these things, but you got to stay alert. Look for people who might have seen something and ask them, right? Did you see anything? Did you see my kid? He looks like this. When you have an older child, such as Jesse, who's in their teens, it's going to be very hard to get the police to act quickly because most of these are resolved. Most cases are resolved where the individual who's an adult comes back or is located somewhere that they either weren't supposed to be or just forgot to tell somebody. But if you have a case where you know it's really out of character, or someone's in danger, someone had to take out protection orders we've seen happen, or they've had a fight with somebody, or there's something there that's really threatening them, make sure the police know. Get your message to them so maybe they take extra action, right? I understand they're acting with the statistics, but sometimes the statistics aren't the truth, and it doesn't help those who fall into that small amount of people who do need the help, as Don Ross did. So stay alert. If anybody has any information about Jesse Ross, please call the Chicago Police Department. Don't forget to drop by our Facebook page, give us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube, which you can find all the links there on Crimes and Times. And you don't want to miss next week. We are going to be talking with a former FBI profiler and an author on serial killers. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next week.